I was devastated when I found out my baby's gender at the 20-week ultrasound. With my second baby, I was wrong about the gender again, but this time I felt pure joy instead of disappointment. The only thing that changed was one simple decision that goes against everything we are told to do during pregnancy. With my first baby, I was planning a home birth with a home birth midwife. I'm not going to go into the whole story here. If you'd like to know more about that, I'm going to link it up above. But I did go ahead and have one ultrasound at 20 weeks. During that ultrasound, we decided to find out the gender of our baby, just as millions and millions of expecting couples do every single year. While I thought I was carrying one gender, and so did my husband, we found out that in fact, our baby was the opposite gender. And we experienced some really real gender disappointment, both my husband, but mostly me. And while at the time it felt completely harmless to find out the gender, and it was just another thing that you do when you're pregnant, in retrospect, I realized it was one of the first chinks in my mindset armor in preparation for birth. As a first-time mother with absolutely no reference point for what birth is and what birth will require of me, and specifically the mindset that I had to get myself into in order to bring my baby into the world, I did not realize that something as seemingly benign as finding out the gender of my baby could actually be one of the first steps in which I sabotaged my own mindset leading up to birth. What really happened was that I was an expectant mother. I had an intuitive feeling about things being one way, things that are actually completely inconsequential. And through science, I was proved wrong. And subconsciously, for me at the time, this registered as, well, if I was wrong about this, what else am I wrong about? And if I was wrong about this, and everything is actually the other way than what I thought it was going to be, what is labor going to be like? Am I going to be able to go through birth? Clearly, the professionals knew better than me, so I should probably trust them more with every other step of my birth. And while this seemingly could sound logical, you would need to know the entire context of my birth story to see how this actually turned out to be completely false and how this thinking took me down a very negative slope. But most of all, finding out the gender took me out of my body and put me into my head about my pregnancy. And if you want a natural, physiological, undisturbed birth, the best advice I can give you is that yes, you need an ironclad mindset, and you should go ahead and grab my free ebook about the 5 biggest mindset shifts that I went through that helped me go from a very traumatic birth experience to the most glorious and redemptive free birth experience of my life. However, in order to do something that is primal, biological, physical, you cannot be in your intellectual brain. You need to be in your body and your primal brain. And engaging your brain in this kind of manner, in this kind of disappointment, oh, I thought I was having X and I'm having Y. Why is this happening? What's wrong with me? Why did I think that? Starts to sabotage you trusting your body, releasing, and stepping into the birth portal successfully. What I realized and learned later is that finding out the gender of our baby before the baby is born actually goes against our biology. A saying that I absolutely love is, if we were supposed to be able to see into the uterus, it would have a window in it. Does it have a window? Did God put a window in our uterus? He did not. And he probably did that for a reason. When I found out the gender of my baby at 20 weeks, the cocktail of hormones that gets released during labor was not in my bloodstream yet, or definitely not to the degree. And so it made the reception of this news very difficult for me. On the other hand, with my second baby, I only found out at birth, and I didn't have a single second, a iota of a second, of gender disappointment to any degree, because I was biologically prepared. I had given birth by myself to this beautiful baby. All the hormones are already circulating in my body. And when I look at him, all I can see and feel is love. And I know that this is mostly true probably for most parents, even if they do choose to find out the gender of their baby before. But very often it is preceded by weeks of being in their head, perhaps being disappointed, or just questioning why is it that they are having the same gender all over again. This simple act is something that sabotages us as mothers. And now I know that we are all different and there are different circumstances for everybody. This is not a generalization. We cannot ever generalize. And especially when it comes to birth, this is not a cookie cutter sport. But from my experience, from what I've seen, from my births and those around me, I have seen a lot more peaceful integration of babies into our families without prior knowledge of the gender. The thing is, when our hormones are fully activated during birth, that intellectual brain part of us doesn't get activated. And we never put ourselves through that moment of suffering if it was to ever happen. And so the answer to how to avoid gender disappointment is to let your biology and your physiology handle this topic exactly the way we were designed to. An interesting point of inquiry is to look into why we even find out the genders of our baby. It is completely inconsequential. It's not here or there. Of course, for the family at hand, it is a huge piece of the puzzle. But why doesn't just everybody wait until birth to find out their gender? Well, it turns out that gender reveals and all the orchestration around finding out the gender of your baby is actually a huge part of the business of being born. Gender reveals have become a massive industry. So many companies profit from our need to find out this crucial piece of information ahead of time and focus on this inconsequential piece of the puzzle, when in fact what we should be doing is probably working on our birth mindset. Gender reveals supplies, decorations, photographers, food, the cakes, the muffins. Pink versus blue start so far ahead before the baby's even born. Social media pressure, everybody asking, are you having a boy or a girl? Suddenly we've taken something that is very private and truthfully should remain unknown and made it into a public for-profit operation. So why don't we ask ourselves, who profits from us finding out the gender of our baby early? Probably not the mother and the baby. So back to my own story. With my second pregnancy, I had a completely wild pregnancy and I chose not to do any tests, ultrasounds, or see any professionals whatsoever. If you'd like to know more about my wild pregnancy, I'm going to link the video up above. I once again thought that I'm carrying the opposite gender than what I ended up having. But like I mentioned before, this time I didn't know until the baby was born, and I loved every single minute of it. Even though if you would have asked me at 20 weeks, which gender would you like, and would you be disappointed if you had the opposite, I would absolutely answer yes. But because I waited until the time when my hormones were fully activated, my body was completely ready to receive this little human. All I could see was that he was perfect, beautiful, here, and all mine. Not only is this the best way to avoid gender disappointment and perhaps not to buy into a multi-million-dollar industry that maybe is quite redundant, but there are further arguments that I have found to be incredibly helpful during my second pregnancy that help to inform my choice to stay away from the practices that also lead to finding out the gender of your baby. And the main way that we do that, of course, you can do it through a blood test as well nowadays, but most people find out through an ultrasound. And while an ultrasound seems like such a harmless, exciting way to get to see and meet your baby perhaps for the first time. Don't even get me started on 3D ultrasounds. There are so many hidden dangers of ultrasounds that are not openly talked about. And this is not a video on the dangers of ultrasounds. That is going to come later. If you would like to hear more about that, please let me know in the comments below and I'll make that. But I'm just going to leave you with a little tidbit, which is, have you ever heard or maybe experienced yourself that when it's time to go in for an ultrasound, your ultrasound tech has trouble tracking down baby? They're avoiding it, they're kind of swimming away. Oh, they're so active all of a sudden. Like, we're going to have to chase them around a little bit. Why do you think that is? If you really ask yourself, let's say you've been having a completely normal morning, your fetal movements were nothing outside of normal, and then suddenly during your ultrasound, your baby is just really trying to hide. This is so often talked about as a cute anecdote that we share with our friends and family. When I hear it, I always get shivers down my spine because the true reason why so many babies try to avoid the ultrasound is in the name itself, ultrasounds. Ultrasounds emit very high waves and lots of heat. And there are studies that show a link between especially early ultrasounds, frequent ultrasounds, and autism, because an exposure to high levels of heat to a tiny little fetus can in fact be quite damaging. But most of all, it is clear that the experience of having an ultrasound is, for whatever reason, extremely uncomfortable for the baby that tries to get as far away from it as possible. Now, if I felt like something was genuinely wrong with my baby and I felt called to truthfully go and seek out what might be going on, I probably would utilize this as a tool. But I would never subject myself and my baby to routine ultrasound checks, especially not the super early ones at 6 weeks. The amount of times that I hear about a very early pregnancy loss that happens shortly after an early ultrasound is just very disturbing. But the same goes for the completely unnecessary ultrasounds that reveal the gender of our baby. I loved the experience of waiting to find out the gender of my baby at birth. I felt like it gave the entire event an extra air of mystery and expectation and excitement. And honestly, in that moment when labor can get pretty challenging, it was that extra little push of motivation that I needed to bring this to completion. I am naturally a very curious person. I love to know all the things, and not finding out was another way of handing over responsibility to myself, trusting my body, not getting completely unnecessary interventions during my pregnancy, but also kind of motivating myself to go through with it all the way, which I obviously would have anyways, but sometimes little things help too. So, a few pieces of practical advice. I know everybody is different. I even know of some families who did choose to find out the gender of their baby and actually found a lot more peace in it. And like I said, this is not a cookie cutter scenario. But I would suggest that you reconsider finding out the gender of your baby, especially if you are particularly set on a specific gender. Trust your body's wisdom, trust the timing, enjoy the not knowing, and anticipate even more meeting your little human right after their perfect birth. If you've experienced any level of gender disappointment, I would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you are wondering about some of the other mindset shifts that I went through during my pregnancy and birth to help me go from a traumatic birth to a victorious free birth, this video is the one you should watch next.